Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile, Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Good afternoon, evening, or possibly morning, depending on when you're watching our show. It is Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and coming to you live from, well, three places: in Ithaca, New York, in Arkansas, and in Iowa. A brief thought before we go to our guest. I woke up this morning to find out that a friend of mine, not somebody I was terribly close to, but somebody I knew and respected and admired, had passed away this morning after a long fight with cancer. John Ward was an Egyptologist, and he lived a life that, many of us only think of as relegated to films and fantasy. He explored, he wrote, he pontificated. He was one of the most colorful, memorable people I have ever met. And my heart goes out to his wife, Maria, and his daughter, Bryony, all of his friends. And I can only think now that he knows the answers to the questions he was seeking and a great deal more, and can do more in-depth investigations into his Egypt studies than he was ever able to do in life. We will miss you, John. And now, Christopher A. Johnston is a recognized trial attorney and certified civil trial specialist with over 2 decades of litigation experience, an 8-time recipient of the Super Lawyer Distinction, and a member of the $1 Million Advocates Forum. Chris has successfully argued cases before the Iowa Supreme Court and has built a reputation as a fierce advocate and legal thinker. Beyond the courtroom, though, Chris is a founding member of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, is also a lifelong ufologist who has completed certificate coursework in astrobiology and earned a certificate in space law through the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, bridging the gap between scientific inquiry and legal accountability in the expanding domain of space exploration. Chris is also a contributing member of MUFON, the world's largest UFO research organization, and has authored multiple articles for the MUFON Journal. Released in 2025, just really a matter of weeks ago, Chris's debut book, Roswell, The Truth on Trial, reimagines the legendary 1947 UFO crash as a jury trial, complete with voir dire, choosing your jurors, opening statements, witness testimony, and closing arguments, and placing us, the reader, in the role of juror. Chris brings a rare blend of legal expertise and scientific curiosity and investigative rigor to the conversation around the UAP disclosure in general and Roswell in specific, making him a significant voice in the intersection of law, science, and the unexplained. Christopher A. Johnston. Chris, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
There we are. Yes. Good afternoon. And yes, thank you for having me.
I got you. Sorry about that.
See, this is part of the excitement of live radio, Chris. This is none of those sissy blogs where you clean things up after. We leave it all in.
Oh, good. Wonderful.
Listen, first, thank you so much for being my guest. I've now done, I'm guessing 500-600 interviews in my role as a broadcaster and some hundreds earlier as an investigative writer. And of course, you're always looking for what we call an interesting guest. And when I learned about your book, all the lights went on. Wilhelm Reich had a wonderful phrase called evasion of the obvious. My first thought was, how come nobody ever thought of this before? It's sitting there waiting to happen, two of the most amazing genres in the world. And before we get into the hyper particulars, let's begin at the beginning a bit. Can you tell us a bit about where you were born, your family, and your childhood, Chris?
Sure. I was born, and we'll kind of circle back to this. I'm real out there. So I was born in 1969, which makes me 55 right now. And the only reason I really reference the year is because we all know the 70s are when things got really exciting with Stanton Friedman and my dad, and we'll kind of come back to all that. But so I was born just very traditional, small town, central Wisconsin, mom, dad, two sisters. I was the baby of the family. Just that very traditional, much to my wife's chagrin, I call it very Norman Rockwell-y growing up. I was very fortunate.
What did your dad do for a living, Chris?
He was an anesthetist. So
wow.
Putting people to sleep, which, yeah. And so it's interesting. I'll flesh that out a little more. So my dad was very, very scientific, right? Which you would hope in that job. But he was one of the few guys, both sides of his brain, he was as wacky creative as he was hard sciences. I mean, both at the same time. Really unusual blend. So yeah. He was really into science fiction. He was really into UFOs, when kind of before they were hip, before they were cool, that was, my dad was into it. And I always say this, some kids would play catch with their dad or go fishing with their dad. He was busy, but when he was around, it was, Christopher, let's go lay on the roof and look at this thing, or let me tell you this creepy, scary story that's probably going to happen to you tonight. But that was growing up, it was kind of, well, that's what dad's into, right? So I just kind of glommed onto that.
I was just thinking, that tradition all over the world of occasionally bringing your kids to work. Like, here, son.
Yeah. I never got to go to bring your kid to work today. So.
At any point, well, as you were going through school, at a certain point, did you feel that you were going to go into the law, or what was it? Sometimes we all know it can be some popular culture reference, something someone said, a feeling of inspiration or wanting to, do good out in the world, and this would be your means. What was your introduction to the possibility of becoming an attorney?
I wish I had a really dramatic, profound answer to that, but God's honest truth, I graduated from a big high school in Kansas City, and I was like fifth from the bottom of my class. I was no student. I had zero interest in academics. As Mom would say, I was busy being a good time Charlie, right? There's a good mom saying for you. But then, fortunately, as happens to a lot of us, I met a woman, right? And I actually wanted to better myself. And she came from pretty good stock. And I started looking around going, yeah, this cool guy thing isn't going to last forever, in this in this family. So I come from a big, everyone in my extended family is in the medical field, to one degree or another. Huh. So I decide, okay, well, there you go. I'm going to be a doctor. And I set off down that path. And I will tell you what, I do have certificate work in astrobiology. I can do astrobiology physics. That's a whole nother thing. And so I just really struggled in some of the hard maths involved in pre-med. And one day I went home and my now ex-wife said, you don't have to go to medical school. And I said, great, I'm going to law school. And I dropped all my sciences and I just took off from there. And now I got very fortunate. I should have the disclaimer. One of those maybe lucky mistakes, because I love what I do. So regardless of how I got to it, I couldn't imagine doing anything else or for anybody else.
When did Roswell per se kind of come into your sights as opposed to the amazing world that you were following your dad into of UFO studies and extraordinary stories?
That's a great question, Peter. That's the first time I've been asked that. And I can't really give you a straight answer. It may be one of the very reasons that I selected Roswell for my book is that hasn't Roswell always been there? Doesn't everybody know something? And so speaking for myself, where along the way did I glom onto that or get into Roswell? I don't know. It just sort of seems as though it's always been there. But like I said, I do remember hearing about it in the 70s. So when did Stanton really start going to town? Maybe 78, something, 77. And so somewhere in there, I'm sure my dad started bringing home the first pieces of literature that he could get his hands on.
Yeah. Chris, did the idea of possibly bringing these two worlds together, trial law and the story of the Roswell crash and all the evidence there is to back it up, chicken or egg first, did you visit Roswell and get the idea or hear about Roswell, then think, I could do this kind of book. I think I need to visit Roswell, New Mexico?
Well, neither, because I have not yet been lucky enough to get to Roswell. But what really happened, and the reason, or a few of the primary overriding reasons I selected Roswell was, one, I already knew something about it. Two, I knew, there's a lot of good, and I'm not being good UFO stories a guy could write about. Travis Walton is a favorite of mine, right? So, but I figured with Roswell, there would be enough source material that, you could do one book on. I considered early on, I was like, well, I could do kind of a book and have 3 or 4 mini trials within it, but it gets really cumbersome. So I looked for one trial that people probably would have at least some passing knowledge on, and that meant, something to me, And again, it does. I know I'm not answering a question why or when. It's just always has been.
It brought back memories for me when I lived in New York City and was primarily making my living as an art teacher. I received a number of jury notices, as people do, but it always makes me kind of sad that the tradition in America more and more has become, this is something to get out of, to avoid. And I think for some people, the idea of loss of salary for those days, I can understand that. But our democracy is challenged enough without not playing our part in these ways. And I was fortunate enough to be selected for 3 different juries, Supreme Court juries in Manhattan. It was, again, for a layperson, a fascinating look at the way these things work. And I wondered, as you started to write, you obviously were learning about the key players. You had to vet witnesses in your mind in a way before bringing them to the floor and swearing them in. Had you thought at points, wait a minute, what if something like this were really happening and not just, an educated fantasy that I'm creating a novel around, but how would I, as an attorney, handle questions around something for most folks as outrageous as the allegation of a crashed craft from parts unknown with non-human beings? Had you put yourself in that spot at all?
Are you talking about, in essence, crafting the voir dire questions, or is that where you're going with that, Peter? Yeah. So, and I'll back up because you did mention it off camera. So voir dire is the jury selection process, and it's a French term that means to speak the truth. Okay? So now in a perfect world, and what we all see on TV, and you painstakingly ask all these questions and you're trying to unearth, biases is what you're doing. Now, the reality, especially in a civil trial, and this will vary by jurisdiction, but so I've tried a lot of cases in Minnesota, for example. So a Minnesota civil jury has 6 jurors and 1 alternate, so that's 7, right? When they first send the group of jurors in, they only put 11 in the box. They'll bring in like 50, and then they'll call 11 and put them in the box, because I get 2 strikes and you get 2 strikes. I take my 2, you take your 2, we're down to 7, boom, we've got a trial. So unfortunately, we really don't have the leisure to be going through voir dire like you see on TV. It would be ideal, but really, I'm more looking for the 2 guys or the gals that are really going to screw me up. It's less about building this good jury, and it's more like, I got to get rid of these bozos because he said this and she said that. So that's the reality of voir dire and how it works. And there are different kinds of strikes, but it gets a little far afield, I think. But so when I was writing the book, yes, I thought very much about, the real world questions. Okay, who here has a bumper sticker on your car? A couple of hands will go up. Oh, great. And you have these bio sheets. Oh, Mr. Jones, what's your bumper sticker say? Oh, mine, it's from X-Files, says, I want to believe, right? Well, I'm going, okay, well, they're going to strike that guy immediately. But, that's exactly the kind of thing, that you're looking for. And so, my voir dire questions would all be usable, accurate, helpful questions in trying to determine who you're going to strike and who you'd like to keep around.
As you began to read about these players, and again, as somebody that deals pretty scrupulously in nonfiction as a writer, investigator, and researcher and the like, there are times that, especially in this field, where things could easily be mistaken for some science fiction story, especially by somebody not kind of aware of what has been going on here. And that in doing your research, in educating yourself, in developing a master plan for how this narrative would go, how it's an extraordinary power that a nonfiction author, that a fiction author has in, well, you're dead and you're alive, but as far as I'm concerned, you're both alive right now, and you're both going to be testifying here today. And so it happens. And as somebody who knows that, a lot of the players' reputations and their stories, it made me laugh, momentarily, just that wonderful whimsical power that fiction writers have, and wondering how some of these people would have interacted with each other. And remembering my wonderful friendship with Jesse Marcel Jr. and his dad, of course, who is such a linchpin in this. And you're learning about them as you're going. That had to have been an interesting process. And then thinking of bringing them together, these dissonant individuals who all are part of the story. Can you just think out loud a little bit on what that was like?
Sure. And first, I want to back up a little bit. And you are right that my book is fiction. For the record, my book is fiction. However, about 98% of the testimony in my book is not fiction. Yeah. It was taken directly from things they previously said. Exactly. That was by design for a whole bunch of reasons. But hey, don't get mad at Johnston. I'm just saying what that's having my lawyer hat on right there. Hey, right, it's these guys. So I think that's important.
That actually has to be confusing to some people in a way. or it might be. Wait a minute, these are all real people and these are things they said, but this is fiction. How does that work? Well, it works because you're completely shaping the narrative. And I'm not going to give away how the book ends, but I will say that you swear your readers in, allegorically, I being one of them, to be jurors. And it's a very unusual feeling at the end of a book, and I'm a big reader, fiction, nonfiction. I've always got a book going for work, and I've always got a book going for, just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of marrying these two forms and setting the reader loose at the end and saying, nice being with you, the end, bye, and the jury door closes. And I know that feeling when that jury door closes. It's what happens now. And 12 Angry Men, or the end of that wonderful Robert Redford movie, The Candidate, a 70s movie. He works hard. He's a progressive. He's elected to the Senate. The last line is he says to his campaign manager, now what?
Yeah.
Going through that door at the end of the book was very interesting. And I'm wondering, even though it's only, it's come out earlier this year, are you hearing back from readers? And in particular, are you hearing back from readers who are attorneys and lawyers?
Yeah, I'm hearing back from both groups, and from the lawyers. What I'm hearing is, well, a lot of them scratching their heads and going, I like it. I don't really get what you're doing. But to me, the important thing is when I hear back from my trial buddies, not that I need to hear this because I already know it, the trial procedure in my book is correct.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very, and in fact, there's objections in my book that I included just so that they could state a different kind of objection and then show the lawyer coming back after the objection to show how you work around them. And I don't know that everyone's going to catch that, but that was really very much by design. So my lawyer buddies, they're all like, weird, but I like it. And from the UFO folks, I'm hearing it's mainly one of my goals was, hey, cool way to present stale information or, old information. And that took some thinking because, my kids finally reached that age where suddenly they don't need you anymore and you have tremendous amounts of free time. Yeah. And so, that's where I am in my life. So I was like, well, I want to write a book. I want to do something, Roswell-y, UFO-y. How do I tie that into my real, my day job? And so that took some stretching just to come up with the concept.
It's funny, as I read, and again, I've read ever so many books about Roswell. I visited, I'm sure, at least 6 times. I worked for the city for several years as a consultant. I'm proud to have some of the leading scholars on the subject as friends and colleagues. And as I read, with a full awareness that while you are studied in the subject, you are not a Roswell specialist. And the individuals that you bring into the courtroom are all players, names that we know, those of us that study these things. But I thought, how can I say, for me, my mind started to fill with lots of other like potential trial details or statements that this person had said that another person had questioned, or how a testimony was adjusted over the years, and thinking if you were like yourself combined with John Grisham and just dug as deep as you could, and thinking about all of the objections, all of the potential arguments, all of the pauses in the trial, and you didn't over dramatize it. And that's really important because It could have been just kind of a goofy paranormal soap opera. You treat the subject with respect, and the attorneys do as well. It's a lot of us that have been in the work for years occasionally do fantasize about bringing this to court.
Mhm.
And, not that it's the same thing, but we are seeing officialdom address this in their own ways increasingly over the last few years, whether it's in the House of Representatives, in the scientific community, the academic community. And I wondered if, as a group, legal minds, attorneys, lawyers, who 10 years ago, like any professional, any sane professional in academia and sciences, would never have associated themselves publicly with taking this subject seriously. We're in, obviously, very different times now. And I'd like to think that whoever reads the book will enjoy it as much as I did. But if you are in the law, whether you're a trial attorney or not, whether reading this book might simply ignite an interest in a subject that you've always been too busy for, or is nonsense, so why waste your time? I would like to think, this book will just go on into the future, and the subject is only going to become more and more mainstream, that a few years from now, attorneys who are now dealing with this, as members of MUFON, or, civilians involved in the work, may be referring to the book and remembering the trial, so to say, in becoming activists in the work.
Sure. It's possible. You no doubt know, or at least familiar with Danny Sheehan.
Very much so, the old friend.
So when I look at, it comes up a lot, as far as lawyers in this movement, I always go, he's the tip of the spear. You want to talk to the lawyer, really, boots on the ground. What is he, about 2 blocks from Congress, and he can trot his proposed bills right over there. And
Yes, very definitely. Let me ask you, as a private citizen, what kind of books do you enjoy reading, just for recreation, not for work? It may be a variety, but have you inherited your dad's taste for science fiction, or you've read a lot of UFO books, or me, whatever looks interesting?
Yep. When I read for leisure, it's business books. More than anything, now you can get me going for another 6 hours. What I really, really like, and one thing about being an attorney that you can do this, is I like partnership building, business building, new practice areas. Who am I going to bring in? And this guy already knows about that part, and I know that guy from over here. So the networking and the business building is what I love to do. I've developed a couple of products over the years. I developed a hockey exhibition league. So I've got my book, and like right now, for example, I'm sitting in my private courtroom here in my law office. When I built out this office, I thought, well, doggone it, I want a courtroom. And then that means a lot of wall space. So then I thought, well, I'm going to have a law museum. I now own one of only 2 in the United States. The other one's owned by Ralph Nader. So yeah, if I could turn you around, it's so point being, I like to read books, from idea to shelf, from international supply chain books. Not that I'm necessarily going to do it, but boy, it really gets me turned on and interested.
A law museum?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that, please.
Okay. So first, the boring part, it's 1,500 square feet. And then I've got 2 overflow deliberation rooms. My judge's box that I'm sitting at right now is a custom built 3-judge bench, so I could use it for more things. Got a witness box here to my left. My jury chairs came out of a courthouse here in Iowa that was being torn down, so they were auctioning. So that's where my jury chairs came from. I've got one room that's dedicated. So the capital of Iowa is Des Moines. It's in Polk County. So one room is dedicated to the Polk County courthouse. Another room right here is everywhere but Iowa. So I have a lot of international pieces here. Off to my left, I have an 8-foot by 9-foot mural that I tracked down a couple of local high school girls to paint for me freehand. Then I have clear shelving, and I have a piece of courthouse memorabilia from all 99 county courthouses. So, yeah. So then I use the courtroom. Obviously, we use it for practice and for training, but then I let community groups use it for free. I just get to kind of tell them about my fantastic services for 2 minutes before they get to use my space for free. So
How wonderful.
I've got a lot going on at any given time.
That's wonderful, Chris. Is it like, a storefront in Des Moines where people can just walk in, or a dedicated building? Or
Yeah, it is a dedicated building, and yeah, people can walk in. And I worked pretty hard to promote it. I've had the museum now for 4 years, and everyone that comes over, without fail, they walk in and their jaws hit the floor. But it's the trying to get them in to begin with. I'm pretty close to one of my sisters, and she goes, well, Chris, you did blend law with museums. I mean, right.
For a lot of people, yeah. Now, I'm a museum person. You say that word to me, and I light up. And what are we going to learn about today, no matter how goofy, if it's a museum dedicated? But what a noble project. And again, the idea of creating your own courtroom.
Yeah. That's
brilliant. And to make it available to the public. My first thought was, gee, how can we have some kind of UFO one-day conference there? Let me, what a perfect forum for a conference. Wow.
So kick that around. I am all ears on all the podcasts I've done. I was like, hey, if anyone has anything interesting, cool, quirky, that's what I like. And I've got the resources, so yeah, keep me in mind for anything you got going.
Really, how many people does it seat, out of curiosity, give or take?
Fire code 130.
Whoa, that's awesome. You could actually do a small conference remotely, unless you had speakers that were close enough. Most of us would be glad to just jump in there.
True.
As a way also to help promote the book. How can I say? There have been so many treatments of the UFO, other intelligence subject, hundreds and hundreds of movies, from, of course, the sublime to the insanely ridiculous. Do you have any favorites just in the fun area, or any favorites in the really kind of inspired area? Maybe ones that you thought about occasionally working on the book?
Yeah, I've got one for all categories. I think Close Encounters of the Third Kind is an outstanding film.
Yeah, it is. It is. And we have a new film coming out later this year from Steven Spielberg called Contact.
That's right. I heard about that. And there's some great whisperings about that movie too.
I like that they've been playing it very close to the vest. And we know we can expect anything from our master storyteller here in the country. If you had an opportunity to talk to students about maybe becoming lawyers, and you started to get questions saying, I know that you wrote this book. This is pretty far out stuff. Are you like a real lawyer, or why should I take you seriously? Or you got me interested in this because being a lawyer is, pretty straight arrow stuff. And I always used to kind of joke this stuff away. Any thoughts on just that idea?
Yes, there's some strong thoughts. Big shock. And I have said this. So I'm coming up on my 25th year of practice.
Whoa.
And so I've been saying this, I suppose, for probably 15 years, because it takes a good 10 years to kind of know anything. But I believe one of, if not the most important trait for an attorney, particularly a trial attorney, is creativity. I get called at least once a month from all guys in my network. And, you do something long enough and you know a million guys. Right?
Sure.
I get called all the time. Hey, Chris, all right, here's my fact pattern. And they will run some fact pattern past me, meaning what happened, and they got a call from some potential client. And they'll call and they will tell me just the most outlandish stories, which you can imagine in our line of work. We hear some doozies. I will hear these outlandish stories, and then the lawyer will go, so what's my theory of liability? Meaning there's something in there, but what is it? How do I get, what's the deal? Well, guess what? I see it because I'm creative. So if you, Peter, are out shopping for an attorney, I don't think, hey, are you creative is a typical question, but that's exactly the kind of attorney that you want. Somebody who's going to look at things from 11 different angles, even if they seem weird or seem absurd. You've got to put yourself out there and be willing to take a look at these things. And if somebody were to raise an eyebrow and not hire me because I wrote a book about Roswell, and more power to them. That's fine with me too, right? But I think it's a great skill to be creative, to look at these facts. I know it's impossible to ever calculate, but I'd love to know the number of cases that over these 25 years, I've gotten calls going, I've talked to 11 other guys and nobody can help me. And I'll go, that's right up my alley. So I've really made a career out of being creative with my cases.
Chris, if you were to be questioned about your own feelings about the case, we all know, well, I think for folks that are, their lives don't involve the law too much or dealing with attorneys, it's kind of a comfortable thought to think that if you seek out an attorney and they choose to represent you, that by extension they believe you. In fact, you know better than I that sometimes attorneys may not believe their clients, but they know that they are going to represent them and do their best job. Kind of an evasion of the obvious question here, but personally, as a writer, an attorney, as a ufologist, belief is a double-edged word, and I tend to keep away from it. Do you believe, based on a preponderance of the evidence that you have seen and evaluated, or just the knowledge that it's out there, or for whatever reasons, do you believe that the events described by those adherents to the true story are true, or that you put this together as fairly as you could, but not strong personally, but of course that would never come up in public? Your thoughts?
I believe, based on the evidence that exists, and that's a huge caveat we can come back to, but I believe that an extraterrestrial craft crashed at Roswell. I don't believe the evidence supports the bodies. I think too much came out too late, too much changed, or, the stories have been glommed onto and really turned into, well, he said, you go back and get into the research and it's like, no, he didn't say, he might have alluded to or what have you. So again, I believe preponderance evidence, extraterrestrial craft crashed. And that's really kind of the extent of my belief, as far as what happened.
Good. Again, reality, as I like to say, doesn't care what we believe.
That too. Oh.
And as an attorney, I am making an educated guess that, you handle a case And it's always going to be there in the background for you as you move into the future, with the understanding that if new evidence is presented that might affect your opinion, your judgment, you're not going to avoid it and be willfully ignorant. You are going to do your best to learn what it was, and if it's warranted, reevaluate your opinion and your beliefs of this extraordinary account.
Sure, of course.
As a member of MUFON, you have, a circle of friends, colleagues. Did you discuss this project with anybody kind of in the business beforehand to see, what their thoughts were about such a book?
No, I didn't. And that, I don't know if you call it a character defect, but that is very much my approach. If there's something that I want to do, if I think it's cool, if I think it's going to be interesting, I do it. And then I'm convinced on sheer will alone that everybody's going to get on board with whatever my great project is. Remember my law museum I was telling you about? So no, I didn't. Not that I cared to or didn't care to. I just thought, hey, I got this. I got access to the source materials. I know how to write. Let's go to town and do it. So no, I didn't check in with anybody beforehand.
I'm actually glad to hear that, in that I've always felt, if you're creative and looking for your next project, we all walk around with an invisible divining rod, and it dips at points, and we either ignore it or maybe go back and listen again and follow our passion and, find that water or whatever. In this story here, when you started to develop a passion for going forward with this book, I'm wondering if you had a similar experience that I did, which was, it's one thing to tell, friends, hey, I'm working on a new article for publication, or, I got a part in a documentary. But if you're starting on a book, I think sometimes the worst thing you can do is diminish your own energy. By the moment that you share the idea with somebody, there's somebody out there who's going to be saying for the rest of the time, how's the book going? It's like, oh God, why did I even mention it? The privacy also within your own head of developing a project, and at a certain point saying, I'm ready to start to talk about this a bit, and feeling like it's coming together well. At what point in the development of the project did you actually maybe say to somebody in the work or a colleague, hey, I'm working on a manuscript and it's coming along nicely? Or did you just silent running until the book was out and everybody's mouth dropped?
Totally silent, except my partner. I figured I better clue him in on what I'm doing with my free time, which, very well could be sitting at my desk, right? So I figured I owed him that. And he just he's like, all right. And now going back to one of your questions, now he said to me that during voir dire, there's also a part where the judge can ask the jury, do any of you know Mr. Johnston? Do you know his law firm? Do you this, that? And so my partner's name is also Chris. So anyway, I was telling him about this book, and he goes, all right. And he goes, but the first time that I'm in court and somebody goes, oh, your partner's with the UFO guy, he goes, then you're done. He goes, you can't do it anymore. But until that happens, I was like, well, if that happens, things have really gone well with the book. So let's, worry about that. So yeah, I just kept it quiet, and I like to think, I don't know if I really do or not. It's sort of, I could tell Peter about it, but Peter's going to bitch about this part, or so-and-so is going to say I ought to change that, and I don't want to hear it. So I'm just going to do it my way and be done. I
wonder, while I was reading the book, and I spent about a week with it, meal times are usually my big time to read, and then in the evening. And as I finished it, I was thinking, um, the individuals in the book, some of whom I knew, some of whom I knew of, um, again, seeing them all sitting in the green room together, so to say, or, that room where witnesses wait, it's intriguing, it's enjoyable, it's one of those kind of strangely entertaining moments where you're thinking about, again, a room full of people. For some folks, it might be famous actors or politicians, dead and alive, that are playing together, speaking together, etc. And how interesting it would be to listen in to the conversations. I also, while I was reading it, I rewatched one of my favorite jury films, which I've watched, I guess, half a dozen times since it came out when I was a kid, about the Scopes monkey trial. Why am I blanking on the title for the moment? But Spencer Tracy.
Is that Inherit the Wind?
Inherit the Wind. And Frederick March, and a wonderful supporting crew, cast. And, trials are timeless. They go back millennia in different cultures, but to bring such a cutting edge outsider subject into the courtroom is something else again. Can you envision a time, let's say the disclosure process is continuing to click along at the rate it is, more and more mainstream people, establishment folks, successful, well-known individuals, or it's now just part of the culture. And as an attorney, do you think that might be some way that we would see in the future this subject brought into an American courtroom? I occasionally try to think of what the premise would be to be able to find a legal way to bring this subject into the light of the law, and working with the law, find a way perhaps for enough of this nonsense. We, as a culture, need to take this subject seriously. Again, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. Am I being completely unrealistic, or can you think of some path as a pragmatist that we might see something like this in the future in some American trial?
I really don't see a path for it on the civil side of things, because, I suppose if we drank enough coffee, we could come up with a fact pattern that, the very first thing that I'm thinking is there's a doctrine called standing. You have to have standing to sue. Like, you're a big Yankees fan and you're mad about something they did with the season tickets, but you're not a season ticket holder. Well, you don't have standing to sue, right? So you got to go away. So my first thought is, if it's a civil case and we're looking, probably some government agency, first of all, what would the grounds be? So we'd have to find somebody that had standing. And then the other issue on the civil side, well, a couple other issues, a lot of people yell about indemnity, indemnification and whatnot. So when you're suing a municipality, be it city, county, state governments, they have different immunities. And this may vary by jurisdiction, so I don't want people to think I'm saying this is everywhere. But the two basic immunities are discretionary and ministerial. And I can tell you this, Peter, just about everything can be shoehorned into, it was discretionary. The fact that they don't have a policy about something proves that everything they did was discretionary. So we don't even have a policy. So that would be tough, finding somebody with standing, and then you find the proper people to sue, and then you got to assume that they're not going to be indemnified, and they probably would be. So then I got to kick it over to my brethren on the criminal side of things. And that would be, 25 years, and I've done probably 2 DUIs. So I don't speak well on criminal, but at least there might be a window. Okay, now somebody gets charged with something criminally, what is it? Lying, for example. So now do they fight it? And that goes to court, so possibly. But then you got to think, let's say that it's, good employee Peter Robbins, and he's going to be charged with lying. Well, if I'm the government, I know full well that Peter's going to tell the truth to get off the hook on this whole deal. So we're just going to go ahead and we'll waive those charges. So, there'd just be I could just imagine being shut down. That was 2 minutes with one guy coming up with about 4 or 5 ways you're not moving forward. So it'd be tough.
Have you ever been a juror, Chris?
I have not been a juror. I have been served a jury notice twice, both in Ramsey County, Minnesota. I mentioned I lived there for a long time. I got called for jury duty, and so I got as far as I told you, the panel of 11 that they would send up, and both times I was rejected and told I could go back to the basement and keep waiting. But I've never served as a juror.
I guess that's the case with so many attorneys. We have about 4 or 3 minutes or so before we go to break. And when we come back, I would like to talk more about the book, but also more about trials, and some that, for both of us, that were particularly memorable. And the other thing is the power of fiction to educate us to subjects that are difficult to deal with for many writers as nonfiction. Is there a film about Contact, that name's a very intelligent one, with Jodie Foster, that is a favorite of yours, completely separate from Close Encounters?
Yeah, well, you kind of spoon-fed me the answers there. I was going to say, if not Close Encounters, Contact, I think is another great film.
Yeah, very thoughtful. Do you yourself have any thoughts on these beings that Whitley Strieber calls the visitors? I call other intelligences, so many people refer to as aliens. They are not obeying our laws. Can you imagine that in coming and going, they have some sense of our social organization, or how we may be perceiving them? Again, speaking as a pragmatist and an observer of reality as a lawyer.
That's a real loaded question. And I was thinking about a similar topic to that here within the last couple of days. And you get into the whole, so somebody had asked me about who gets to be the person with first contact, right? And then there's the stories out there that the aliens met with, who was it, Eisenhower?
So they say.
Right. So they said. So if that were to be true, then that's telling me 100% somehow the extraterrestrials know that the United States government, they're the ones to go talk to. So I do kind of struggle with that, but then at the same time, and now we're really blending theories here. What do we always hear? A common thread in the abduction stories? Well, they talk to me, telepathically. All right. Well, if that's to be believed, then what's to say we can't telepathically, like CE5, right? It all kind of builds on itself.
Well thought of. and a perfect place for us to break. This is Peter Robbins. My special guest tonight is Christopher A. Johnston. His book is Roswell, The Truth on Trial. We are meanwhile here on Earth, and we will be back in 5. See you
The
then.
Unex Network presents a health and wellness spiritually based brand of hemp-derived CBD products made by Hopewell Farm in Harrogate, Tennessee. We apply our Cathara energy work with all of our plants and products. Our products made in small batches with only 2 ingredients of pure hemp, full spectrum crude oil, and coconut-derived MCT oil. Third-party lab tested for potency and legal THC levels with 6 strengths of 1 ounce oil to choose from. Know what you're buying and get what you pay for from Hopewell Farm. Applied directly to a specific area, Hopewell Farm topical salve in 1 ounce and ½ ounce sizes made with pure hemp crude oil, comfrey extract, and all natural ingredients. Find the Hopewell Farm link and coupon code on the Unex Network website at unexnetwork.com. That's unexnetwork.com.
If you want something fun to do with the family this summer, listen up. It's the ultimate celebration of the iconic sci-fi universes that have captured people's imaginations for generations, and it's taking place in Bonne Terre, Missouri. Special guests include a NASA astronaut, Disney artist, YouTube content creator, and characters from the Star Wars universe, also robots and world-class model builders. The Space Museum and Grissom Center in Bonne Terre presents its latest installment of Show Me Space 2025 with Show Me Sci-Fi Space on Saturday, June 28 from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. The Space Museum and Grissom Center is located at 118 East School Street in Bonne Terre. Call 573-358-1200 or visit space-mo.org. That's space-mo.org.
The new book, How to Research a Haunted House by paranormal investigator Margie Kay and professional researcher Violet Wisdom, is now available from Unex Media. This one-of-a-kind book explains how to do research on a house with uncommon methods and resources used by historic home researchers, and how to determine who may be doing the haunting and why. How to research a haunted house can be used by homeowners, renters, investors, and it should be in the library of all professional paranormal investigators. Get this unique book at unexmedia.com or amazon.com. That's unexmedia.com or amazon.com.
And we are back. Peter Robbins here. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. My guest tonight, Christopher A. Johnston. Hi, Chris. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I mentioned that I had been a juror 3 times in New York State Supreme Court, and 2 were civil trials, 1 was a criminal trial. You, as a litigator, are Are your trials sometimes criminal, or are they all basically litigations that are not going to put anybody in jail, so to say?
Yep, and you're exactly right. Yes, mine are all civil, going to be money types of matters, and that is one of the very reasons that I don't, initially shied away from criminal law. I make a mistake, and now Peter's freedom is at stake. I just don't, and I want to say, and I know it wasn't necessarily your point, but you were mentioning earlier, if you think your client isn't necessarily telling the truth. Another, throwing a bone to my criminal defense brethren out there, their jobs are so important. I can't even overstate it, because nobody, and I'll get that a lot, well, how can you do that if you know somebody's guilty of this? Hey, I'm not, and again, I don't do criminal, but if I did, this is what I would say. I'm not saying that Peter is innocent. What I'm saying is prove your case. Right. And if you don't have somebody stand and being a gatekeeper to make the government prove their cases, okay, you're going to jail. I'm going to jail. Everybody's going to jail because, well, they didn't have to prove anything. And that's the role of my criminal defense buddies. So very important. But
have you come away from the trials that you have taken part in overall with a feeling of respect for the juries that you have tried cases before, or something less than that?
I'll tell you, I have been, that's a really interesting question. I am always, even if it doesn't go my way, right, I'm always amazed at how closely it's like those verdicts will come back and go, whoa, because you could tell a lot by the numbers. Oh, they awarded this and they didn't award that, all this kind of thing. And yeah, there's times, right, I don't like the result, but I'll be like, yeah, that one was a little specious, and they caught it. They got it, So 99 out of 100 juries I've had have been just like that, really diligent. They don't want to be there, but once they realize they're kind of stuck, they tend to do it right.
I'm really glad to hear that, because my experience is I was knocked out by the juries that I was part of. Again, these are Manhattan juries. You can imagine the jury is represented by every color and every racial and socioeconomic background. And once those doors close, holy moly, the best parts of you start to emerge. In some cases, as you know, juries fight back and forth. Other cases, you go into that jury room and you pretty much know how you're going to vote. I wanted to think out loud on two cases that I was involved in part just to relive them a bit for myself, but to get your take on them. A case that I served on that was a criminal case turned out to be, there's humor sometimes that you don't expect. In this case, a young man was charged with selling drugs to undercover police officers. They had him on camera. They had him on tape. They documented his whole history and presented it very well in the case. The defendant only spoke Spanish, and we were asked if in any way it would prejudice us to have, a translator there. I think all of us sincerely said no. And the defense that emerged was this: Your Honor, I'm obviously thinking back some years, and it's not word for word, but this was the judge. Your Honor, I was looking to find a friend of mine in the Bronx, and I knew that they lived in this area, and this building looked familiar. So I started ringing the bells until somebody let me in. And I was just wandering around, and a door opened, and I started to chat with this man. And imagine my surprise when even I would have to agree that we shared a certain physical resemblance. Very red curly hair, lots of freckles, amazingly the same T-shirt, and so on. Now, we're sitting there, and the evidence for this man's guilt had already been presented in a way that was overwhelming beyond any reasonable doubt. And he said, then we were talking, and we heard bang, bang, bang on the door, and it was police officers, and they broke through the door, and he went out the window and down the fire escape, and they found me, and here I am, completely innocent. Well, another thing that was established was the apartment was on, I think, the 6th or 7th floor, and there really wasn't a fire escape. Well, we are led back to the jury room. The bailiff, gives us our instructions, closes the door. We're seated at the table. The forewoman is there. We look at each other, and everybody at the table burst into hysterical laughter. And we really, the forewoman had to kind of calm us down and say, well, let's take a vote. And bang, 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 all 12 of us guilty. But she said, we owe this man every possibility of reasonable doubt. And we spent about 2 or 3 hours. And we came back and gave our verdict as guilty after reevaluating everything. But there was a point before the judge charged us with the case. And this was a New York City archetype, a very tough, no-nonsense, obviously extremely experienced female judge, very much reminding me of the legendary Judge Judy.
Oh, yeah.
And at a certain point, Chris, I think it was at that point when the translator said to the effect of, imagine my surprise, Your Honor, when even the judge did a very involuntary one of these. And then by chance saw that I had seen her do that and gave me a look like, you will disregard that blanking move of mine, and you will, well, anyway, we all felt that we had served well. And at the same time, it was funny because the defense was so beyond pathetic. And the legal system just went over this guy appropriately like a steamroller. Anyway, your thoughts? Is that something you've encountered in a completely separate kind of way?
Yeah, it's great to hear that, your foreperson or whoever it was said, hey, we owe it to this guy. Because that's how we like to, imagine, those things would be. Yeah, Peter, I had the most salient point right in there about halfway through your comment. But again, when I think people do take things differently, criminal juries versus civil juries, even as I said, the risk of your freedom versus your money, it might get a little bit, short shrift, no pun intended there. But so I haven't had that exit. Now I have had a judge, which really this was an appealable issue, but we ended up finishing, I don't know, at 2:00 on a Friday or something like that. And the judge told the jury, hey, if you guys can be done by 3:30, you don't have to come back Monday morning. Yeah, well, they were done by 3:30, and that was kind of a dirty verdict, I felt, because now they have incentive. Look, judge said, let's get the hell out of here,
A second case that I was a jury on was a civil case, but it had great poignancy, and we felt in part maybe it could have been a criminal case, but it wasn't. And it involved a young physician doing his residency at one of the big hospitals up on the east side in Manhattan, who was brilliant and showed great promise as a heart surgeon. From all of the information that we learned in coming to our decision, this this was the kind of surgeon you dream about, who could have made a big difference in a lot of people's lives. And the situation that emerged was he had worked a very long shift and was now driving home. At that moment, a call went out from the New York City Police Department of a possible robbery in process, and it was responded to by an unmarked patrol car, an unmarked police car with 5 New York City police detectives in it by chance. They immediately made all haste to get to the location in question. And in doing so, they ran a red light and broadsided this young physician's car. He incurred tremendous physical injury. When he recovered, there was no chance of him being a heart surgeon. And he settled in as a GP in a small town in the Midwest. And it was a civil case against the New York City Police Department for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. We were all on his side. And it turned out, by the way, that the call for robbery in process was a complete false alarm. Well, the fact was that driving home, overtired, listening to music with his windows up, even though he had the light and was broadsided, had he not been audio excluded, he very likely would have seen the car coming or heard it. And we went back to the judge 2 times on technicalities to find out if there was a way we could decide in his favor, and there wasn't. And we had to decide against him. And so he realized nothing from this terrible accident that he'd been in. And, nobody was the bad guy here in a way, but it made us sad and frustrated that we were stuck with the law as it was and couldn't award this man something for the damage incurred. Something that have you ever encountered any case like that you've dealt with? Even
I know I can imagine exactly the scenarios that you were kind of messing around with in there. And it makes me wonder, I don't know New York's comparative fault statute. So a lot of states, so I'm licensed Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and my partner too. A lot of states have what's called modified comparative fault. And that's what we have here in Iowa. So what that means is, Peter, we go to trial and you get $100,000. But the jury, the next question is, well, was Peter at fault and was Bob at fault? And keep in mind that their total fault has to equal 100. Okay. So now they hit you with 50% and they hit Bob with 50%. Your $100,000 verdict, you apply your portion of fault. So now you're down to 50. Now, in states like mine, if you now say they put 50.00001% of fault on you and 49, whatever it is, on the other guy, you recover nothing. Mm-hmm. So, obviously I don't know what your special verdict form looked like, but depending on their comparative fault statute, I could see that be a reason, hey, you put blame on this guy and he's out. I could see it be that way. And I've had similar, we call them impossible or absurd verdicts. It's like, well, Your Honor, the jury can't say this and have it be in a line, with this. It's just impossible. I would say when that happens, it's usually the lawyer's fault, because all the forms and documents and everything we have at trial, we bring all those. The court doesn't get, we work on them together. That's all the behind the scenes stuff. I work with the defense lawyers and we come up with the documents. So when we roll into court, we both better know we were both involved in the creating of these documents, so if there's a mistake, and mistakes happen, but that's oftentimes where you get those, those absurd verdicts, or there's another phrase I'm drawing a blank on, but yeah, so I've had that happen.
I want to talk a bit about the third trial I was involved in, which was civil, but in our minds, the jury's minds, should have been criminal. It's the one trial that I was involved in that not only made me question the New York state legal system or certain laws within it, but made me come away from the case so frustrated with not having our jury not having been able to produce anything near the result we had wanted to. It was a major trial in New York. It's about 40 years ago. The defendant was a man named Bernard McCummings, as I recall, McCummings' trial. It was covered in the three major newspapers in New York, the Times, the Post, the News, several times making the front pages, and not for reasons we were pleased about. The background was this. This young man who had a minor criminal record and two friends had decided to come downtown and rob somebody and, go and have a nice evening with the money. And the man that they chose to rob was on a subway platform, one of the platforms between the tracks and the street. And the defendant confronted him with a sharpened screwdriver. And at that moment, quite by chance, at the time we had transit police, they came onto the platform, they observed what was happening. The defendant turned to run away, and the transit police officer, observing what had just happened, simply took out his service weapon and shot the defendant in the back as he was fleeing. When questioned on the stand, he said, no, he was coming at me with the sharpened screwdriver, and somehow when I shot him, it spun him around. But that was bullshit, as you might say, in legal or non-legal terms. The wound was in the back. And then a witness was presented who heard the highest ranking officer on the scene say to the officer who had discharged their weapon, loud enough for somebody to hear it and make it public, what you did wrong was you didn't kill him. The defendant was black, the police officer was Hispanic, and what the whole case was about was because this young man was shot in the back, fleeing a crime that had been observed. He suffered complete lower body paralysis for the rest of his life and was confined to a wheelchair. He began to speak to, he served his time and then was released and then got himself a good attorney who had brought this case to New York State Supreme Court. And based on the attorney's calculation of his future needs, which all had been set in motion by illegally being shot in the back, fleeing a crime that he most certainly committed, that the state of New York owed him something like $27 million based on, well, for example, he was going to need a special kind of hospital bed for the rest of his life. It cost $64,000, nurses coming in, blah, blah, blah. Our jury not only once again had every complexion, but an extraordinary representation of skills. We had a financial advisor, we had an accountant, we had a Wall Street broker, and we were able to break down the numbers, work on our blackboard and say, you don't need a nurse's aide for the rest of your life, with the projection being from standard, insurance tables that you're going to live to be 67 years old. You need a nurse's aide. So first, that $1.2 million you're going to spend on it will only be, $400,000, et cetera. We worked for 3 days, and together we were able to bring that figure, which, the city certainly owed him something. The man was a violent criminal on a certain level, but the cops didn't play the game right. And we came up with, I think, $2.3 or $2.7 million as the total. And for pain and suffering, I think we awarded him what we considered an insultingly small amount, X number of thousands of dollars. Well, we left the jury room feeling as proud as we could for having fought hard to save the city of New York, as much money as possible. The next day, the New York City papers exploded, front page on two of the papers, the Times and the Post, accusing us of awarding this violent criminal this money. And, with no real breakdown. I was called by a number of the papers. I did an interview for Newsday, the big paper on Long Island, expressing my absolute outrage. I guess the afterthought here, Chris, which I wanted to address with you, was I came away so frustrated. And once again, we asked to see the judge either 2 or 3 times, trying to find a way, basically to award him nothing, or at least as little as possible, but we had to stick to the outlines we were given. And I felt at the end of the trial something that surprised me, which was if I had a chance to be on another jury where the outrage was so obvious and you knew you were going to not be able to produce the result you were after because you were up against the wall of a rigid law, I thought to myself, I might well not decide on the basis of the evidence next time. I would decide on the basis of my opinion of the evidence. And that's not the way to go, in the most noble way. But that's how frustrated I was. Your thoughts on that particular trial, Chris, and how?
Well, I think that, and you said that one was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. So imagine now with the cases we have, and especially, the politically charged ones, nobody's going to want to serve on a jury. We have in my opinion, absolute lack of civil engagement, civic involvement in this country already.
Yeah. Yes.
And we're not doing any favors by, talking bad about, juries. I just went on about the criminal defense guys. We have to have a jury system, and nobody wants to be on a jury until you're the one in the witness box, because by God, you got caught up in, some rigmarole. You're going to want a jury then, you want a jury of your peers. So it's crucially important. And it frustrates me, Peter, because what do we see every year? They come out with the Stella list. Oh, look at these most outrageous, the civil cases out there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, first of all, my biggest takeaway, if people want to listen to one thing I have to say, when you see these cases, fact check them, because if there isn't a citation, big long string of numbers and state names and stuff, odds are half the time these things are made up. They're not even real. But then you take the ones that are real, like the case you were working on, and the McDonald's coffee lady was Stella Bombeck, I think her name was. What everybody says is, oh yeah, that lady got a bunch of money because she spilled that hot coffee on herself. Stupid old lady, right?
That's it.
Let's take a look at how many citations McDonald's had gotten and had been told, this is exactly what's going to happen. This is exactly why you couldn't do it. And McDonald's made the business decision. They said, well, you know what? We know our coffee tastes better at 7,000 degrees than at whatever temperature you're recommending. It's worth the risk to us. So they cooked it right into their calculation of running McDonald's anyway. And then I don't remember the exact number, but there's a process called remitter, where you're trying to reduce a verdict. I think her verdict ended up somewhere down maybe $700,000, something like that, which might sound like a lot of money to people, but she had third-degree burn. She had skin grafts on her
Oh
vagina.
my God.
I mean, and this is an old lady, and McDonald's is well aware, and they took the risk. So, so like in a case like yours, yeah, it's real easy for people, sitting on their couch to go, oh, well, they don't know what they're doing. They weren't there to see the evidence, but as you know, everybody's an expert. Oh, I watched the whole case on TV and I know blah, right? But yeah, it's,
I wanted to share a detail with you that came up during the voir dire process, my process, where I'm on the stand being, at this point, being asked questions by the defendant's attorney. And again, this man had been shot in the back by a New York City police officer. And he asked me if I had, any knowledge of firearms. And, you just simply answer the questions as truthfully as you can. And at the same time, you're not a fool, and sometimes how you're either being led or the attorney feels he's found or she has found a spot where you can be flattered or made to feel somewhat important and respected, or the appearance of respect. And he asked me if I knew anything about firearms, and I said, yes, I'm a target shooter. He said, do you own a handgun? I said, yes, I own 2, legally registered. And I saw his eyes light up. This, now he had someone who he knew felt that they knew something about ballistics, and might be compelled to speak about it a bit and feel. So he started to ask me questions, and I was not going to deny that at the time, not only was I fairly knowledgeable, I was doing my own reloading. I owned a Colt government 45 automatic and a Walther automatic, and I knew how many grains of 1,100 grains of gunpowder were in a police special flathead 38, and the difference. Well, I could see this man almost having a bit of a picnic, and while I was answering the questions, thinking, I do know these things, and at the same time, are you kidding me? I see what you're doing here. And he chose me, and the other attorney chose me for the jury, and none of this information came up. But I remember every once in a while, attorneys make momentary eye contact with the juror. And when he did, it would always be like you and me, we got something going here. Again, it was pathetic on a certain level, but it was fascinating. And I wonder if this is something that you have observed or done yourself in some ways, or it can be used, of course, for the good, or it can be used to control and manipulate. Your thoughts?
Right. Let me write this down. Right there. Hold on, bear with me. Okay. Well, first, I will use my own. As I said, I was called for jury duty twice, never got picked. But, during the voir dire process, you get an idea what the case is about through their questioning, right? And so what this case happened to be was a sex offender who failed to register in his county. So that was the case. So the defense lawyer, or the prosecutor rather, asks, he goes, well, does anyone here have a problem with the Minnesota sex offender registration? Well, it was a bad question, but also, who in the world is going to say, yeah, I got a problem with it, right? So I'm not sure if it was a bad question or if he was just trying to slide over something. But I raised my hand. And he goes, you got a problem with the sex offender registration? And I said, here's the deal. I don't have a problem with the sex offender registration as such, I said, but the big news, the NBC affiliate up there is called KARE 11, right? I said, my problem comes from the administration because it seems about every other year a big story pops up that the state can't seem to find these people, but KARE 11 goes and knocks on their door, and there they are. The defendant goes, that's what I'm talking about. And they're like, okay, Mr. Johnston, you can go back downstairs. But your question about using it for good, and this is where I thought you were going to go with your knowledge on guns. Sometimes, because voir dire, it is not meant to be persuasive. It's not to be argumentative. It's just to ask questions and get answers. But depending on what you're answering, say a case like yours, Peter, for example, I might just let you go and go and go, even if they might cut you, because what you're saying is getting in everybody's head, right? So if I find a crack like that, say that you're an orthopedic surgeon. Well, I might know that I'm going to get rid of this guy, but I'm going to say, well, what do you know about facet injuries? Oh, they're this, that. Are they painful? So I'm essentially getting you to testify via voir dire. So that's where you can use it for good. Yeah.
Here, you've reminded me that in voir dire for a case that I was not selected for, which was a mugging on a street. Yeah. The attorney asked me if I would have any reason in my personal history or family history or anybody I knew where I might be biased in this case. Now, I'm in open court with other potential jurors, and I know, or I think, my answer may bias some of them, and that he doesn't know it, but this is a question he really doesn't want me to answer. And I tried to find a way to slide around it, and he, all the more reason, asked me to answer honestly. And I said yes. At one time or another, both of my grandmothers were mugged, and no further questions. Yeah. Jurors just potentially dismissed. And the look on his face of, shit. Maybe I should have intuited that I shouldn't have asked the question because he was trying to. Anyway, have you ever had a situation like, no, thank you very much, please, don't say another word and go away?
I have, but there was nothing. As often happens in trial work, something will happen. And as the lawyers, the defense attorney over here, he's my sworn enemy, right? And things will happen during the trial that suddenly we are best friends looking at each other going, what the fuck? What do we do with it, right? It's going to be up to the judge. However, so here's a classic example I had. First, this was a pretty high profile case because it was only the second time this had ever been done in the country. My client happened to be a recovering drug addict, and she was walking in downtown St. Paul and got run over by a city of St. Paul public transportation bus. And it's all on video, and the driver's in the mirror and she's talking to the guy in the back, and she's turning the bus, and my client's wife, so she turns and she runs her over. So my client ends up at the ER, and what do? They fill her full of Dilaudid. So in addition to having all these other injuries from this, she now is on the Dilaudid and she relapses. Okay. So I decide that I am going to make the addiction a measure of damages. Very good. You go talk to 100 lawyers and call me when you find one that ever did this, because nobody's done it. So I decided to make the addiction the measure of damages. So now we're at voir dire, and about 5 questions in, this guy in the front row, right, crosses his arms and just starts interrupting. And he goes, hold on. If this is because somebody took drugs because they got hurt, I'm not going to be on this jury, right? So defense guy, he's kind of laughing at me, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know what to do with that. So usually in real practice, what happens, the judge will have him come up, and usually the judge try to fix it by saying, okay, well, I get it. You don't like people that use drugs for any reason or whatever the issue happens to be. However, could you still be fair and impartial? And then, of course, 9 out of 10 of them, well, yeah, I can be fair and impartial. And then you're stuck back with that terrible juror. So that's why it's great when the judge gets rid of them. So that was the biggest pushback of a juror that I've had.
Yeah.
I had a juror was seated and sworn who at the end of the day asked open court who she had to let know that she couldn't make it the next day. And we're all like, when we asked you that earlier, anything that would prevent you from serving, and you said no. Yeah. So, people are going to be people.
One thing that I loved about jury duty is in New York City, the courthouse district is downtown, right up against Chinatown. And there are certain restaurants that you go into at lunch, and that at least 50% of the people are lawyers or jurors or downtown to be interviewed to serve. Everything's changed since 9/11 in New York as far as access to certain buildings, but the main courthouse is a wonderfully historic building, and it's adjacent to the newer federal courthouse where major mob trials, John Gotti and the like, all took place. I share one thing with you. I'm not sure if I ever talked about this on the radio. There was a famous mob killing in New York many years ago of the Godfather, the ranking organized crime figure. He's a man named Paul Castellano. And he was assassinated getting out of his car along with his driver, about to have dinner in a restaurant around the corner from me, Sparks Steakhouse. I was waiting at the bus stop to head downtown to teach my painting class at the School of Visual Arts. And unaware that around the corner, John Gotti and his assistant, Sammy the Bull Gravano, were sitting and waiting and watching as this thing happened. The three shooters were dressed in overcoats. They each had fake or real mustaches. They each had glasses on, and they each had kind of a Russian-style fur hat. They discharged their weapons and started to walk east. I got home from my class, turned on the 11 o'clock news, and learned about this. And the descriptions of the shooters were these three men who had walked right by me, as close as I am to my screen. I saw their faces, and even disguised, I saw their faces. And for about a half a second, there was a part of me that said, I need to call the police right now and report this. And then another part of me took over, not quite as civic-minded, thinking, you weren't a witness to the killing of this major mob figure, but you did see the witnesses. Is this anything you really want to deal with in a public forum? And I took a step back from my heroic self and did not report that event. Your thoughts as far as citizens' responsibility in a moment like that, or if you have ever, dealt with an attorney or a client who has ever had anything like that to deal with?
I'm not going to pretend to be so altruistic that, Peter, how dare you, right? We're all going to look out. We're going to look out for ourselves, and in a scenario like that, mob bosses or whatever scenario you want to put it in today. I don't know that I would have wanted to be on Diddy's jury, and that's just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
I think, it's all our pay grades, but how way above our pay grades how are we going to get society to have some kind of, civic pride, right? And try to bridge some of these gaps, which interestingly, look at this. So we've done it. Bringing it all the way back to Roswell, I think that's one of the reasons that the cover-up has been so effective in the early years, especially because we're on the heels of World War II and USA, right? We're the greatest thing going. Our government, they love us. We just won the war. Everybody loves the Americans, so they're not going to lie to us. And if they say they made a mistake, they made a mistake.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be very interesting from a thought process. Well, actually, I hit on this the other day. What I was going to say is it would be interesting to see if Roswell, if the events happened today, right, how would it be different? Because now there's such this distrust of the government. So if Roswell happened now and they're like, oh, we made a mistake. You know, about 80% of the population, bullshit, you didn't make a mistake. You're lying to us. But what that brings me to, in a sense, we're seeing in real time Roswell via the Epstein files. Yeah. Think about it. It's the same stupid arguments. And now what's the last word on Roswell? Oh, yeah, now all the stuff is gone and missing. Well, I guarantee it someday my kids will be sitting here, my grandkids, and all that Epstein stuff went missing. So it's like we're living Roswell in real time via Epstein.
You brought up something that really is a major issue for me. Watching the coarsening of society on a certain level, and beginning really in the 80s, the idea that the government is bad on a certain level, and we should do as much as possible to give them as little power and responsibility as possible. And, you know, the great American, I've got mine, good luck getting yours. And if you touch mine, I'll kill you because I feel threatened, and that's the law. It makes me sad that I guess most average folks now, if they get a jury notice, their first instinct is going to be, how do I get out of this? As opposed to, this is my civic responsibility. I live in a country with laws. Hopefully they will continue to be observed. But this is part of the payback. I'm proud to do it as an American, as opposed to making it, you know, cool. I got out on some excuse, and, you know, I would have had, you know, when I was a juror, it was $15 a day, 2 subway tokens, and a voucher of $5 toward your lunch, which could cover lunch at the time in Chinatown. But I get it, you know, there are more enlightened workplaces where they will pay you the difference of, you know, your.
You know, having my law museum, you know, and I even have, you know, different field trip options on there, you know,
Great.
There's different things that can happen. And I started reaching out to all the social studies teachers, right? Hey, you should come over here. First of all, I learned this. We don't do a whole lot in the way of civics. And 2, we can't really do field trips unless they're 100% geared towards, and I'm no big academic guy to pretend to understand how the Department of Education, all that works. However, now, unless it's like law museums, unless they're going to be tested on law museums, they can't go. You know, so it's like even these, the schools, their hands are tied by, I don't know what. So when you have a facility in operation, I'm like, hey, you ought to come over. I can teach you more about the legal system in 2 hours than you're going to learn, you know, reading a book. Sounds really cool, but we can't. We need the classroom hours and and again, that's way beyond me.
I just think, you know, you offer such a wonderful opportunity. And again, for some people, those 2 words together immediately make their eyes cross and them go to sleep. Museums are, well, I think they're one of the most wonderful resources in the world, from the huge established, internationally respected ones to the tiny hole in the wall eccentric ones. But a law museum, it immediately resonates with me, and the idea of offering it as an independent educational facility that you can use in, like you say, in very creative ways. It's a backdrop. It immediately sets a certain tone. And for me, like, a museum experience can elevate the soul. I think of some of the great museums in America and around the world that I've had the privilege of visiting, and think back always in a positive way. But what you're offering here is quite wonderful. I wish we had one here in Ithaca, which is certainly a very progressive town and has a lot of interface with students. But well, one thing I'd like to do, Chris, and we're coming into our last 10 minutes now. I am sorry that I didn't speak with my attorney about coming on the show with you. I think the two of you would hit it off great. He also is quite studied in the subject of UFOs, has visited Roswell, and wrote a legal evaluation of the case that I think would support the contention, of course, that it's very real. His name is Robert Young, and he's a wonderful attorney. And I would like to find a way, maybe in a few months, to figure out some kind of panel discussion with you guys and maybe some other people about UFOs, the law, looking to the future, space law.
Yeah, it could be really interesting.
No reason why not. I mean, you really have filled a unique niche here in the world of UFO studies, and certainly the world of the law, where this territory is pretty rare. Your book, of course, is available on Amazon, but as I try to remind people, our local bookstores are a dying breed. We should always do our best to support local independent book dealers, and any book in the world can be ordered through them and give them, rather than a certain very wealthy person who owns Amazon, the benefit of that sale. I recommend it highly. For me, again, in the world I live in, it is such a unique take on the subject. You're most welcome. You earned it. I will be interested in learning. Hopefully, this broadcast will get some of my viewers and listeners' attention on this book, and to follow up, ideally with some attorneys as well as you and Bob, on their take on the book. As things stand right now, are you looking at another book writing commitment in the future, or holding off right now?
No, I am. As I mentioned earlier, the more irons, the better, right? And then the dowsing rods got me goofed up, and now I already started book number 2, which is going to be Crop Circles, The Truth on Trial.
Really?
Yep. And so that'll be next. Hopefully that'll be out sometime around Christmas.
Wow.
So in that one, Peter, I'm finding a little bit easier than Roswell because of the fictional standpoint, right? In Roswell, as we've talked about, I tried to use real witnesses, the real things they said. So I was a little bit beholden to that, which is fine because, that's what carried the narrative. But with Crop Circles, I'm finding Mike Jones, and and of course I will include all of the big topics around them, but I'm going a little bit more fictional, but still telling the narrative.
Chris, between you and me, would you be interested in speaking to some of the more respected crop circle researchers just on background?
Sure. Yes, I'd love to.
I'll follow up with you on that.
Great.
Very good. Yeah. I, like most people interested in non-standard outsider subjects, paranormal, whatever you want to call it, the phenomena of truly authentic, unexplained crop circles fascinates me. I was lucky enough to spend some days in Wiltshire, I guess about 10 or 12 years ago, with several colleagues, and spent time in several new crop circles.
Wow.
People have asked me, knowing that, what was it like? What did it feel like?
Yeah.
because certainly credible individuals have had some extraordinary experiences in that. And all I could say was, I don't know. I was so excited, to be there.
Yeah.
Wiltshire is exquisitely beautiful English countryside and the largest concentration of Neolithic activity and standing stones and old burial cairns and that I have no idea how I could sort some potential vibration or feeling from the overwhelming novelty. Also, that series of days was simply the most beautiful series of days of any location in the history of the planet Earth.
Oh,
I literally expected Jane Austen to come riding up in a coach. It was just so. It a wonderful subject to come at once again with this template. I will look forward to just thinking out loud with you on this.
great.
Just great. We have 5 minutes to go. Anything that you would like to discuss or bring to our viewers' attention or share with us relative to your involvement here?
Yeah, sure. We had mentioned earlier that I'm a contributing member to MUFON, and a piece that I wrote, I don't know, going back now 3-4 months, that I think is kind of fun and interesting. It's called the infratempestrial hypothesis. And what that is, are you familiar with Dr. Masters out of Montana, or Montana State University?
No.
So I believe it's Michael Masters. So
I heard him speak 2 years ago. I thought he was brilliant.
Okay, right. And so his theory is what he calls the extratempestrial, okay, which means beyond us in time. Okay. And for your listeners that don't know, in short, what his theory is that extraterrestrials are us, like Peter and Chris, but on a different timeline, and they're time traveling to come back to see what's going on Earth. And kind of it's a basic, easiest one. So when that first came out and started picking up some traction, I loved it because I was like, God, it's something different, something kind of interesting. The guy obviously is smart, right? Well, as we also mentioned, I have a bit of a background in astrobiology. And so one thing in his theory that really caught my eye was he was saying, yeah, because if we took Peter and we sent him out to Alpha Centauri or wherever the hell we send you for 1 million years, you are going to evolve into looking like this stereotypical gray. Okay. Well, I knew enough about astrobiology that I proved the same thing could happen to life on Earth with the environment we had 3.5 billion years ago. So my theory, I went with the infratempestrial, which means below us or beneath us in time, kind of a play on words on Dr. Masters. And my position is, no, extraterrestrials are us, developed on Earth 3.5 billion years ago. They developed the technology to leave. They left. Now, just like Dr. Masters says, they come back to see what's going on. But in my theory, I've eliminated time travel, which I have a real problem with, just generally. And, looking at Occam's razor, well, one theory's got time travel and one does not. I like Chris's theory better. So that's what that's about. And it was a lot of fun to research it.
Yeah. Time travel is one of my favorite themes in the moderate amount of science fiction I've read in my life. It is put forward, as we know, as a possible explanation for certain visitations. I wish I could take it more seriously. And, you hear all these wonderful theoretical possibilities. It may be a number of things that, cause this to happen. But yeah, what a great topic to come at in this spirit. We will have you back on, no question about it, Chris. And otherwise, just again to say to my friends who loved and knew John Ward, who passed away this morning, a wonderful Egyptologist and a great guy. My condolences to all who knew and cared about this great guy. Otherwise, Christopher A. Johnston, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will see you guys next week. Stay well, stand up and fight for what you believe in, and over and out for now.
Thanks, Peter.
My pleasure.